Hi all, it's me, and we're heading into non-fiction November. So I want to talk about some of my all-time favourite non-fiction in the non-cookbook category. So I'm going to start off with one that has been very personal to me. It has really spoken to me an awful lot. It's All Absolutely Fine, Life is Complicated, so I've drawn it instead by Ruby Elliott. Now, Ruby is an artist. She is also bipolar, just like me, and has an eating disorder, which I don't have. But a lot of her drawings surrounding bipolar disorder, depression, things like that really speak to me speak to me a lot. And I would say if you are neurotypical yourself, or if you have someone you love that's close to you who is neurotypical, maybe have very bad depression, anxiety, things like that, I really would recommend this book. And it also has good passages well on dealing with the sort of mental health services in the UK, which at the moment are just, they're really bad, so bad. I have joked recently that in order to get any decent mental health help, you would probably need to be standing on top of a parking garage. But I won't make any more suicide jokes because my husband doesn't like it. He doesn't think it's funny. So, but this book is funny, and it does have a lot of good bits on mental illness. If you're looking for a bit of a giggle, this book has been near and dear to my heart for like 18 years. It's the first book I bought on anthropology. It really got my intellectual steam going. I ended up doing anthropology at uni for 4 years. I was lucky enough to work with a professor there who was interested in the anthropology of death and dying and stuff as well. So I was really lucky because I got to work with him. And he also was familiar with Tim Taylor, who was the professor who wrote this book. It's amazing. I've read it so many times. I think I know most of it like off by heart, but it talks about the extremes of death and dying, like cannibalism. Does satanic ritual abuse exist? Ways that people treat their dead. If you like Caitlin Doughty and Ask a Mortician, I think you'll really enjoy this book. I thoroughly recommend it. There's probably some bits in it now that are maybe a bit out of date, but a very good place to start. And if you really enjoy that, then there's another book called The Secret Cemetery, whose author I forget, but I'll put it on the screen, is another great place to go after that if you're looking for more academic material on the anthropology of death and dying. I wrote my uni thesis on cremation, if that makes any sense. Now, in a similar vein, I suppose, sorry, I'll stop making jokes, is Ancestors by Professor Alice Roberts, a story of Britain and 7 burials. Alice Roberts was on Time Team. She was a bone expert on there, and she does a lot of programmes on TV in the UK to do with history and archaeology. She's very readable, she's very knowledgeable. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and especially the parts on the very, very early burials in the UK, like Cheddar Man and things like that. And she doesn't shy away from the sort of context of what you find out about people, like when they revealed the sort of bust of Cheddar Man and he had very dark skin and people were up in arms like, oh, blah, blah, blah. The same as when Mary Beard and the BBC put a black person in an image of Roman Britain and people were up in arms about it because they're dumb. As if the Roman Empire didn't stretch through North Africa, most of Europe, sorry, it's something that I can go on an extreme rant on, but I really did like this book. I bought it in person, like in physical copy, because I thought there would be illustrations. There wasn't, so I was feel free to buy this one on ebook I've also got on my reading list, my TBR, a book by her of animals we've domesticated and how that's affected human civilization. So I really like that one. Now, this is to do with my latest hobby, and it's the only hobby I've ever stuck with for any length of time, which is cross stitch. I love it. And I picked this up because, well, the patterns looked good. I'm just going to be honest. Like, women's rights are human rights. I mean, who doesn't want to stitch lovely little feminist messages to adorn your house? Currently, I'm working on one that says "bitch please" in nice bright rainbow colours. When I finish that, I'm probably going to try one of those patterns, and I will let you know how it goes. But it seems good and it's fun. So, on to some ones that I've got on my Kindle. I don't have physical copies of. The first one is The Great Mortality by John Kelly. Now, last podcast on the left did a series on the Black Death, and The Great Mortality was one of the sources that he used. So I picked it up pretty much right after that, and it was really good. If you are interested at all in the Black Death in Europe, about the origins of the Black Death, about the spread, a lot of historical information on how it moved from place to place and how it affected, trade, all that kind of stuff. I read another book, it was The Black Death in London, quite recently, but I didn't like that one as much. It focused a lot on people's wills, and I was kind of like, I mean, interesting academically, but not for me. So I would recommend The Great Mortality if you're looking to know about the Black Death in Europe and about how people reacted and things like that. Given the time period we're in, pretty interesting. And in a very similar vein is Ghost Map, the story of London's most terrifying epidemic. Now, I can't remember the author, so I will put it up on the screen in the video. But this is about the last big cholera epidemic in London and how it was traced to its source. And also it covers the context of the time that particular outbreak was happening. People were just sort of coming to grips with like germ theory, like leaning away from the miasma. Like by miasma they thought that these passed through the air, through bad smells, but some people were coming up and saying no, it's passed by touch and things like that. Like Joseph Lister, the guy who first used like antiseptic in operating, which actually there was in the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. He was working at the time. Very interesting stuff. I'm actually reading a book about him right now, which is called The Butchering Art by Lindsay Fitzharris. I'm about 60% of the way through it, and it's really interesting. It's so interesting how people don't change at all. Really resisting germ theory and stuff, resisting doing very simple things like wearing a mask, perchance, that are, people resisting the science. And also how, like, some of these people's, and by people I mean men, it was men at the time, like how their ego prevented them from doing that. Like they knew that so many mothers died of like post-birth infection, and it was even shown that the women in wards run by midwives and nurses, which were cleaner, less mothers died than the doctors, and the doctors would just go from one woman to another, and they were just taking the disease and the dirt and stuff with them. So really interesting. If you are at all interested in medical history, science history, I recommend it. Lindsay Fitzharris also does good videos, and she runs a Twitter account as well, which has loads of good medical history information on it, if you like that sort of thing. And then this one, In the Heart of the Sea, The Tragedy of the Whale Ship Essex by Nathaniel Philbrick. And this is the true story that Moby Dick is actually based on. It was a whaling ship out of Nantucket that was rammed by a whale. And they have various theories on why the whale rammed them, but the ship was sunk basically, and the crew were left on lifeboats. There was cannibalism, there was murder, there was racism as ever, and it's really an interesting story which has a lot of context on whaling at that time, the sort of scale of whaling. When I read it, I was thinking it's no wonder the whale population still hasn't recovered like 200 years later, because man, they were killing, oh my god, so many whales. So very interesting story. Thoroughly recommend it, especially if you have read like anything on the Donner Party, which, just while I'm at it, stars above. Again, I can't remember the author, but I'll put it on the screen. Is a great story, a great book about the Donner Party if you want to read that. Ask a Mortician did a good, quite long video on the Donner Party, and if you found that interesting, then Different Stars Above has a lot more information. Now, this one is, I believe it's a translation. It's Artemisia by Alexandra Lapierre. And I picked this one up when I was in Florence a few years ago. I love Florence. I would move there. If I won the lottery, I would just buy a flat in Florence and just cook and go to museums for the rest of my life. That's what I would do. But Artemisia was, I mean, she wasn't the only female painter in the Renaissance, but she was certainly the most famous. Her father was also a famous painter, and she did an amazing Judith and Holofernes, which I love so much. A really interesting woman, amazing life, and also, I don't know whether it's like the only one or not, but she unfortunately was raped by a man visiting her dad's house. Maybe he was her dad's student, and it's one of the very first recorded rape cases, actually, and it's a shame that that's what a lot of times she's remembered for, because her art is so amazing. But a very interesting life. Thoroughly recommend it if you're interested in Renaissance or art history. Then you've probably already heard of Artemisia, but I recommend it. And then in the vein, in the thread of women's art, because a lot of it is women's art, is The Golden Thread: How Fabric Changed History by Cassie Sinclair. I'm really interested in the fabric arts, like embroidery, sewing, all that kind of stuff. You know, my cross stitch and stuff like that as well. And it's a really so interesting on how people are, how they change fabric to suit them. One of my favourite anecdotes from this book is actually how Playtex, the bra makers, made the first like spacesuits that went to the moon, and how the people who made the spacesuits and the fabric and stuff at Playtex, how they interacted with NASA and stuff like that. It's such an interesting book. I really loved it. I think it was the first book I read in 2021. I started it off right, so I thoroughly recommend it. Again, not a lot of illustrations, so you can get it on Kindle and not miss anything. And then also Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham. A really great in-depth like timeline of Chernobyl, the context in Russia at the time, you know, basically why it happened, how it happened, the science of it, and how it was dealt with afterwards. If you enjoyed the show Chernobyl on HBO, I would say this is a really good book to get more context and information from, and also how it's affected people on an ongoing basis as well. Really enjoyed it, very interesting. Not a light read though, I'll say that. And as for other non-light reads, I also read a lot of true crime, which a lot of us do nowadays, I think, anyway, but I cannot tell you how fed up I am of hearing about Ted Bundy. Literally, if one more person makes a TV show about him, I'm gonna scream. I'm gonna scream so much, because it's been done to death. He's not interesting. You know, it drives me absolutely bonkers. And I just hate how he's so famous and people probably don't know the names of any of his victims or anything like that. It drives me nuts. So if I hear, I will not ever recommend any books about Ted Bundy, about Richard Ramirez, or about, maybe about BTK, because that's an interesting way he got caught, because he was dumb. But true crime wise, in terms of books, I have been trying to steer away from the Ted Bundys, The Stranger Beside Me, you know, all that kind of stuff, which is interesting to a certain degree. I mean, if you've never read or watched anything about Ted Bundy, you know, fine. watch one of those things. But true crime that I would recommend, number one is The Hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper by Michael Bilton. And the reason that I recommend this one is because it's about the investigation and not so much about him. The investigation into the Yorkshire Ripper changed how police work investigations in the UK for good. Permanently changed it. And it's the reason why we now have the Home Office large inquiry system that all police forces use to index evidence, because in The Hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper, they were using paper index cards, and at one point they had so much paper they had to reinforce the floors. That's how much it was. So while the actual Yorkshire Ripper himself is deeply uninteresting, just another man that killed women, you know, just another misogynist, investigation is very interesting in the sense of procedure wise. So I would recommend that. And I would also recommend The Five by Hallie Rubinold, which is, again, the canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper. And I think Hallie Rubinold, and I totally get where she's coming from, so annoyed about the mythologising of this man, that she wanted to know more about the women, and the sort of brush off of, well, he killed sex workers. Not that I think in terms of using it to say, oh, you know, killed prostitutes and whatever, and, you know, you never really knew much about them, the actual women themselves. It was just like they were the footnote in this myth of this man, that she went away and she did so much extra research into these women and really brought them back to life. One of them, as much information as you could, like their children, their marriages, what they did, you know, all that kind of stuff. Really thoroughly recommend it as an antidote to the myth around Jack the Ripper. Yeah, thoroughly. I mean, I'm not immune to stuff like that myself. We did like a Ripper walk and stuff like that when I was in London, and the woman that was doing it actually did a lot about the victims as well. She went a lot into it, which I thought was really great, and I can't remember the name of the actual tour, but it was really good. I recommend it. And yeah, that is, I have now talked for 20 minutes about non-fiction books that I love. So if you have any that you really love in the comments, if you've read any of these ones that I've talked about, let me know. Let's have a chat about it. And obviously, hopefully, I will also be making more videos. So yeah, take care. Bye.